to watch is a video of an interview I did with one of my clients, Guy Ben-Aharon, Executive Director of the JAR. The JAR has a really unique and powerful mission, as you'll see, but they struggled to really tell their story to specific funders. While they had grown immensely over the 5 years of their existence, they really were hitting a new growth period and needed to articulate the impact they were making with their constituents to their funders. So the work we did together was an impact study where I talked to all of their members and their constituents to really understand and articulate both the stories and perspectives that people were seeing and experiencing, but also bring data to that so that they could tell their story in a more holistic way. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Guy Ben-Aharon, Executive Director of the JAR. And when I first met Guy and the JAR, what really struck me was it just reminded me of my own personal motto of we're all in this together. And that just immediately just connected me with the organization. And we just had a really wonderful time working together. So I wanted to share what we did with all of you. But first I want to introduce Guy. Guy uses the arts as a vehicle to build diverse, vibrant communities. He's worked as a playwright, leading playwrights on staging, workshop, and premiering over 50 premieres, as well as brand new translations since 2010, with theatrical programs in the US, UK, and Israel, along with your recent premiere of Oh God. And Guy, you have been a self-described serial founder, which I love, but I wanted to just...
Personality disorder.
Yes, it's a good one to have. But first, I would just want to see if you could tell us a little bit about the JAR and what you were doing sort of before I met you.
The JAR started in 2019, really as a way forward, as a possible way forward of creating diverse, vibrant communities that were centered in the arts, that were centered in cultural experiences. So we know a lot of things to be true. One is a lot of cultural institutions tend to be very homogenous. When we go into those rooms, they are alarmingly homogenous, is what I would say. The symphony spaces, the ballet spaces are alarmingly older and white. And then there's new cultural institutions that are alarmingly not diverse as well, right? If you go to an Asian film festival, it's likely to be a lot of Asians, and that's not diverse either. And I was seeing this and thinking, there's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be a playground where we play together. And the arts as a vehicle, as a tool to bring people together and create something that's shared, right? So there's a whole lot of initiatives to bring people who are not like one each other, centered on their disagreements, which I think is insane. They are much more likely to leave not liking each other, right? Like, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat. Can't you get along? No, it's sort of the country's big answer. You're black, you're white. What are, your differences? Like, that's not the way to build community. You focus on a shared experience. So I would say, one, the lack of diversity, alarmingly homogenous rooms. Two, the fact that we were being separated by our class, right? There's you can always buy a better ticket at a theater. You can always buy a better experience at a nonprofit if you're a donor. And at the JAR, there was a subversive methodology that says $10 a head, no matter what. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you look like. At $10 a head, you're walking in the same door and you're walking out the same door having had the same experience. So something that sort of creates an equality in the room and that no money is exchanged at the premises. That's another sort of big one. And I would say the third one is an intervention, sort of a structure that allows people to be their full, authentic selves. So once you come in, you're coming in with people who are like you and not like you, and then you experience a piece of art together. And then there's the structure of how to use that art. And that's where a lot of places, I would say, fail. And the jar creates a jar, creates a container by which it asks thematic questions of people where they respond from their own personal experience. So it's no longer about, I'm intellectual enough to comment on your piece of art. No, it's, what do you feel? How does this relate to your life? There's no wrong answer. And in that sense, people who are like you and not like you are hearing about your lived experience. And you're actively listening to people's lived experience that's like the who are like you and not like you. And that brings you closer to them. And so that's sort of the why. And I would say the big sort of revolution is the how, which is at the jar, we don't have single tickets. When you come to the jar, you're either a convener or a guest. And a convener brings their plus one, partner, best friend, two usuals, whoever they would normally go to the movies with on a Friday night, and two unusuals, two people who don't look like them, don't love like them, don't pray like them. And that is the revolution. I always say there's many ways to quit drinking if you have a problem. And AA is one way. AA is not the only way to stop drinking, but it's a pretty good, damn, and efficient way of doing it and proven. There's not one way to create a diverse room, but the convener model is a really efficient, great way to take on the problem that is segregation in our country and polarization. Yeah, that was a lot of guys. So that's
Yeah, no, and I love, we've all experienced the arts by sitting in our, in the dark room and leaving with the people we came with to maybe discuss it. And it does feel, now that I've participated in the jar, it does feel lacking. You can see how little interaction, how few perspectives you get on that experience. And so I know you talked, when we first met, you talked about the jar as an experiment, and that you were, really kind of struggling to fit into the various funding sectors that are out there. So can you tell me a little bit about, what were you thinking about as you were realizing that you needed to do some research around the impact you were having at the jar?
yeah. One of the things is when you're creating something that's never been done before, people won't know how to put you in a box. And funders and humans in general like to put things in boxes. It's a much easier way to live life.
So
Not
true.
complex, right? It's black and white. It's this way, not that one. And I think one of the reasons, one of the main reasons we wanted to do impact evaluation is we had anecdotal stories of what people were saying the jar was doing in their life, which are very powerful, but we wanted to capture them as a group. We wanted to look at trends across how convening impacts your life. And we recognize that when we talk to people, it's not a third party. So their relationships, because the jar is so highly relational, we wanted to find a way to have the conversation outside of us and through you to truly hear how convening was making an impact in their life and really unravel new layers of what we were already hearing and put some numbers and see trends of how this impact was felt by certain demographics as well. And I think that was something that was revelatory through the impact study. Had we sort of sat down and thought about it, maybe we would have predicted some of these trends, like the fact that younger people were more acutely affected by convening, right? Younger people, they still don't have their people yet. They are more, they're less set in their ways.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with non-white conveners. Society literally works against them in Boston. If you're starting a race in Boston to buy a house and you're white, you're here. And if you're not white, you're here. So literally, it's more difficult. And so it's not surprising that we found the findings that everybody is impacted by the work of the jar. Everybody feels an increased sense of social cohesion, reduction of polarization, the diversity that's truly in the room, and the hope they have for the future when they leave. But it's more acutely felt by conveners under 50 and conveners who are non-white. So I think the impact study really helped us clarify that and have the ability to go, okay, these are different buckets where we are making an impact. And that is very much the case of who funds us. I mean, our largest gifts come from three very different buckets. They come from arts and
Mhm.
culture giving. They come from spirituality giving. The jar is creating a new type of church, a new type of spiritual center, and democracy building. The true neighbor to neighbor democracy building, not vote for my ballot question, but the let's build social trust. Let's weave social cohesion. The results, we're able to share them as a way of saying, do you like this type of impact? Is this the type of impact you care about? Would you like to increase that type of impact? That's where impact work comes in so clearly, in the ability to help you make an anecdotal case a an impact case.
Yeah, well, I know, the jar sits in such a unique spot. I think, I would say it's like a non-traditional mission. And the fact that, you're able to work with so many funders from so many different sectors, I think is really unique as well. And I'm curious, going into this work, is that where you were hoping is to build a case for each of these different funders for this impact report, or to maybe guide them as to following your vision?
A little bit of both. One, I think I just want to say that impact is not only measured for funders, it's measured for the people who are feeling the impact. So the impact report has literally made a difference on the life of the jar in its day to day offerings. So at jar happenings, now at the top of the program, when the facilitator speaks, the facilitator says, when you gather at the jar, you 1, 2, 3, 4. So actually, we play the impact back literally in the room because that's who's most important. So that's just one to say that impact doesn't only live with funders, it actually lives
Yeah,
very much
that's
with the people who are being impacted. And that's where a lot of nonprofits go wrong. All they do is care about their funders all day long. And while funders are very important, the people who participate are the most important. So
exactly.
that's a different answer to your question. To answer your question about funders, it's both. We want to be able to make the case strongly that if you are a democracy building funder, the jar is a wonderful vehicle for you to invest in to build democracy. If you're an arts and culture funder, the jar is also a wonderful vehicle for you to invest in. And so the impact helps us do that. And the other thing that in which we are leading funders, I would say, or are a little bit ahead of them, is and I think funders are catching on. They're realizing these impact areas cannot live in silos. Arts and culture is not just arts and culture. It's dead otherwise. Paintings, if they're not viewed by anybody, they have a value, but they don't really have a value for society. And I come from theater, and that's where, we truly are people who believe that art doesn't matter if we don't have audiences. We are fully aware that we are engaged with society. We are leading funders to think more innovatively and to cross fund. So one of our funders, the Henry Luce Foundation out of New York, is actually funding us out of two different programs.
Oh, that's
They don't
wonderful.
fund us through one program, right? They fund us through two different programs because they recognize we're making a difference in two places you wouldn't normally put together. But actually, when you think about it, they do fit naturally together. So, long way of answering your question. It's a little bit of both.
I come from a world that does not, think in buckets. And so that is great to kind of have that give and take where, funders do kind of get forced into buckets and force their grantees into buckets. So it's great to both be able to make those cases and also educate them on, arts can be spiritual and it should be democratic. So that's wonderful to hear. And I guess the other question is there anything that you talked a little bit about how some of these things in hindsight seem obvious, some of the, who's maybe most affected and most engaged in some of this work. Was there anything that most surprised you about our work together?
Surprise is hard to say to be honest.
We, we can interpret that word however you want.
I've been doing it for 5 years. And I think the role of a founder is to be a visionary. So you have a vision for what you're going to do in the world. I've been surprised by maybe the way it's came out to be, but not by the impact. I think I was moved by people's personal testimonies in sharing how when they walk out, they feel more open-minded. I was moved that people talked about hearing about people's lived experiences that they never heard about outside of this type of room. I was moved when people said they traveled to new neighborhoods. Right? It's like an adventure. I guess the most surprising thing was the demographic data. Because the jar has been avoiding demographic data and asking people at the door to give demographics, because I don't want them to think about their own boxes. Having the demographics of the conveners was very gratifying. We knew it was diverse. We didn't know it was that diverse. And we didn't know that it was so close to the census of the city of Boston, that our work was that successful in recreating who lives in Boston. I think in many ways, when people hear the word diversity, they have one type of image of a person come up in their brain. And the reality is that's not diversity. That's one type of person. And the JAR's work has proven that diversity is much more than that.
Yeah, we even talked a bit about visible and invisible diversity and how you work to represent that as well.
Yeah. Yesterday we had a happening, a Brazilian themed happening where if you looked around the room, lots of different ethnicities. And then we asked the question of who was born outside of Boston, the majority of the room, and who was born outside the United States, like a third of the room.
Wow.
There were people from 10 different countries, from Iran to Argentina. And that's also a diversity that you wouldn't normally meet in your average room. And that's also very exciting, because I think if you're truly going to go on an adventure with a jar, and I always say it's like a really great trip for 3 hours, you're going to be exposed to different ways of living, and in many ways, similar ways of living. That's what contains the surprise for participants that makes them want to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in each time it's different, right? It's a different mix. So Guy, I've heard you say, you knew people had good things to say about their experiences at the jar. You kind of had an inkling that, the diversity was represented, and even being moved by the stories, you've still heard stories like that in the past. What has it meant for the jar to go from just having sort of those personal insights and anecdotal stories to having more data, having numbers that sort of support all those things?
It makes it a thing. I mean, in the life of a company, you have an idea for something, and then you have sort of proof of concept. You're like, okay, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And then you have startup mode. You're like, okay, let's keep going. And then you have growth mode. And we're somewhere between those last two. And this allows it to grow, because it allows it to say, this is important. This is data gathered about it. Here's how you can pay it forward. And here's how you can pay it forward. It's not just the funder saying, here's how you can pay it forward. It's the conveners. It's like, you're having this type of effect on people's lives. Don't you want to do that more times a year? And when you recruit new people to convene, when they hear that they're having that type of impact, that's moving to them. It serves as data told well, serves as inspiration for people to create new habits.
Yeah, I love that, because but it's great that you're not just sharing this with funders, as you're sharing it with your members, with the people who come to your events. How has it changed the staff and how they think about the work?
Just lights a greater fire under their ass. If we're having this type of impact,
love that.
We should spread it more.
Yeah, I'm sure it adds a lot of value to their work as well. So has anything else changed when you think about the jar before this work? And I know you always refer to it as an experiment. Has anything else changed about the jar today now that you have this proof of concept?
I am by nature an iterative person, and that's because I'm trained as a stage director. My job is to take a playwright's words and interpret them and reinterpret them and reinterpret them and reinterpret them. In many ways, I'm not far from my forefathers who would sit and study the Talmud over and over and over again. Certain things fall into place at the jar that we realize this works. Don't fuck with it. This is still not working. Let's change it. Or if we are having this type of impact, how do we design the program to further that impact? If this is an impact area that we care about and want to lean into more, how does our communication about it change? So I think that's where that's making a difference.
Excellent.
And it just opens up a whole box of new questions of, oh, we could do a whole other impact study on this other thing. Or we can do a whole other exploration of what this means to people who are one-time jar participants versus people who do it 10 times a year. And I think that's exciting because in the life of a company, when you're growing, those are the questions that should be inspiring your growth. You're not growing just to grow because that's, I don't know, we are not growing just to grow because if capitalism had its way, we would have been shut down a long time ago. We are growing to serve these impact areas and just to allow people to build, this type of future. And by having the data, it helps people recognize, or it really shows them. It's like, here's what you're doing. Yeah, as I said before, it's an inspiration forward.
That's wonderful. And I love what you say about being iterative because your team is just so focused on the work that you do, both in welcoming people in and making sure they're delivering that unique experience that leads to all these impacts. So I just love the thinking that you bring, guide your team in, but also that they bring to the table. It's been wonderful working with them. And I think that really, leads to these unique impacts that don't see many people doing out there.
It's I'm very grateful that I have a very skilled team and that everyone's obsessing over something different. Right? We have somebody who obsesses over the fact that your experience is magical in the room. We have someone who obsesses over the fact of your becoming a better convener. We have somebody who obsesses over the fact that technology is going to help you become a better convener. And all of those things overlap. It's like the funding buckets. We have conversations on how our things impact each other, but it allows people to be iterative in their various areas. And my job is to bring it all together. But it certainly would be no fun to do it alone. And it ain't my skill set. So I'm very happy when someone is obsessive about their part of the game.
Yeah. Well, Guy, I think after hearing a bit about the jar and its impact, I'm sure people are going to have tons of questions. So I'm curious, what's the best way for people to find you and learn about the jar?
Yeah. So to find the jar, jumpinthejar.org. The easiest ways. There's a contact page there, so if people have questions, they can certainly submit their questions, and we are very diligent about responding to them. And for me, I would say the best way is through probably LinkedIn or one of the social media sites like Twitter, where people can follow. So I imagine you have the technological wherewithal to link it all somewhere.
Yes, we'll put them all at the bottom so people can connect with you. But I just wanted to thank you for your time talking with you. This is just such a wonderful experience, and I love what the jar is doing in the world, and I'm excited to see it do more.
Thank you, Emily.
All right, well, thank you for your time, Guy.